Chapter 3 City of Bells. Shallan finds herself on the precipice of a new city, Kharbranth, the City of Bells. Nervous, she holds her drawing pad close, reflecting on how her life had taken unexpected turns. She expected to live the typical life of a noble lady, not docking at a strange city she would have only hoped to visit. The city is vibrant with multicolored buildings and the sounds of bells tinkling. Shallan had been traveling along the Wind's Pleasure, a small seafaring vessel in pursuit of the Princess Jasnah Kholin. She reflects on the nature of her plan as being duplicitous. The people of Kharbranth are diverse and exotic. Shallan reflects on the 6 months she has spent chasing Brightness Jasnah Kholin, and how the princess is the only member of a faithful royal house to be a professed heretic. Shallan laments that this trip has taken significantly longer than anticipated, and grows concerned over her dwindling resources, despite the fact the sailors she travels with come at a discount thanks to her father's business connections. Captain Tozbek approaches Shallan, and the two chat briefly, with Shallan's wit and clever banter displaying what her nurses might once have called an insolent streak. Shallan enjoys the liberation that travel brings. She tends to be quiet in crowds and recalls that her brothers think of her as timid. They had been concerned she would feel frightened on her journey. Although her house's finances remain a concern, she has loved her journey and filled her sketchbook with many drawings of wonders she's seen. Captain Tozbek intends to wait at the dock for 2 days, waiting out a high storm. Then, if all does not go well with the princess, will return Shallan to Jah Keved. Shallan makes her way off the ship, keeping her left hand covered, as is the custom for Vorin women. She's uncomfortable that Captain Tozbek can read. In Vorin culture, reading and writing is seen as a feminine trait for women, although men learned glyphs. She contemplates the war on the Shattered Plains. It seems so unlikely to her that docile Parshmen would fight so fiercely. Her guide, Yalb, tracks down a local with a 2-wheeled vehicle designed for travel through the city. Shallan opts to take the direct path to her destination, the Conclave. The cart runner explains to the guide, who translates to Shallan, that Kharbranth is one of the safest and most sheltered cities in the world. Most cities are built in lates to protect from high storms. The bells of the city, the cart runner explains, are a symbol of the city's safety. It is said the city is so safe, its inhabitants didn't even know when a high storm occurred, and thus needed the bells to let them know. Shallan finds this explanation entertaining, but unlikely to be factual. The group arrives at their destination, and the cart runner attempts to con Shallan and split the money with her guide Yalb, though Yalb informs Shallan of this. Shallan has never used money, but enjoys its beauty. Money takes the form of tiny glass spheres with gemstones embedded in the center, each capable of glowing with stormlight. She pays the cart runner less than the con, but more than the value of the ride, possibly accidentally offending Yalb by using him as a go-between, though he seems to find humor in it. She pays Yalb a ruby mark worth a week's wages as a sailor. Yalb protests that it is too much, but she insists he accept on the condition that he wait several hours in case she is unlucky in her pursuit. Shallan makes her way into the conclave. A servant is sent to inquire about the princess. Shallan reflects on her calling. In Vorin culture, a calling is the profession a Vorin dedicates their life to. She could have chosen art, her drawings, but she feels inspired by more than just art. It is also the study, so she chose natural history. She longs to be a scholar, but she must focus on her task at hand to become Jasnah's ward. Though this is merely part 1 of the mad plan she herself had concocted. The servant returns and leads her down a hallway. Shallan hadn't expected Jasnah to acquiesce to a wardship. Nevertheless, she did, and instructed Shallan to attend her at Dumadari in 2 weeks. She had been chasing Jasnah ever since. She wonders if the heretical Jasnah will make her renounce her faith. She must make her plan work, though. Her father is dead, her family bankrupt. These must remain secret lest her house be ruined. There's nowhere else to turn. Taking a deep breath, Shallan turns a corner. Chapter 5 Heretic. Shallan is surprised to find that Yasna is beautiful. She realizes she had imagined Yasna to be more akin to an ugly spinster. As Shallan takes in Yasna's appearance, she notes a piece of jewelry. 2 rings and a bracelet, connected by several chains holding a triangular group of gemstones across the back of her hand. This, she notes, is a soul caster, a name given both to the item and to the people who use it. This soul caster appears identical to one found in her father's coat. Yasna takes note of Shallan, but continues her conversation with the elderly king of Kharbranth, Taravangin. From what Shallan overhears, a concerned Taravangin seems to be asking something of Yasna which may cause some issue for him, though Taravangin assures Yasna that she needn't worry about him over the potential political backlash. The 2 of them walk off, Shallan in tow. Yasna directs her attention to Shallan now. Yasna is impressed with Shallan's tenacity in following her, though she admits she'd assumed at this point Shallan, like others, would have given up their pursuit long before now. Shallan realizes this had indeed been a test. To Shallan's dismay, Yasna informs her that she had not yet decided to accept Shallan as her ward, merely that she may petition her for the position. Although frustrated, Shallan covers her frustration sufficiently to impress Yasna. Yasna proceeds to interview Shallan, and while it doesn't appear to go terribly, it certainly doesn't go particularly well. Shallan knows that she has some deficiencies in her schooling, but she thinks to herself that Yasna's expectations are unreasonable. When Yasna remarks that her expectations are reasonable, Shallan bravely calls her out on seemingly wanting a ward who is already a master scholar. Shallan winces at her blunt outburst and apologizes, which Yasna seems to find acceptable. They discuss Shallan's deceased mother briefly. Shallan is surprised to hear that she is the 12th young woman to seek a wardship from Yasna. The traveling group arrives at their destination, where Shallan sees a giant rock that appears to have come loose from the architecture. The rock blocks a doorway from which Shallan can hear voices. Although the city is well protected from high storms, and the palace is usually safe, the high storms shake the very mountains and do cause an occasional avalanche. Yasna notes that what she is being asked to do will cost her a very valuable focal stone. Taravangin laments that they do not have a shard blade. Yasna bids those around her to get to a safe distance, but Taravangin refuses to leave while his granddaughter is trapped. Likewise, Shallan chooses to stay near Yasna. Yasna asks Shallan how she would determine the mass of the stone. Shallan impresses her with a simple and elegant response, that she would ask the palace architects who already made the calculations. Yasna begins soul casting, something Shallan has never seen in person. She wasn't even aware her father had one, even though it was one that no longer worked. Yasna's hand sinks into the rock, and shortly after, the stone vanishes in a burst of black smoke. She transformed the rock into smoke. Shallan notes how aggravated the Ardents of the Ardentia must be that such a powerful soulcaster is in the possession of a heretic. Yasna intends to dismiss Shallan, but Shallan notes that she had not been asked about the feminine arts yet, an area in which she feels she excels. Yasna feels she has never had much use for the feminine arts. They are merely frivolity. Shallan, angry at her denial of the wardship, determines not to give up. Her house depends on it. She has changed. The wardship was just one part of a larger plan, to steal the heretic's soulcaster. Chapter 7. Anything Reasonable. Shallan, determined to become Yasna's ward, sets her mind toward her task. As she heads through the main hall, she considers her father's character. She remembers him as being skilled in politics, hated, and ruthless, qualities that led him far, in addition to newly found marble deposits in his territory. Shallan reflects on her naivety. After interrogating her deceased father's surveyor, she realizes her father had used his forbidden soulcaster to create new marble deposits. Although a steward, Luesh had been trained to use the soulcaster. It had been rendered inoperable after breaking. She reflects on her intentions to use the soulcaster to settle her family's absurd debts, make new quarries, feed their dependents, and finally, safely, announce her father's passing. A servant brings Shallan through the veil, a gorgeous room outside the Palanium proper. Before she can enter into the Palladium, however, she is asked to pay 1,000 sapphire bromes to enter. A steep price to pay for access to the largest collection of tomes and scrolls on Roshar. Her father's 87 books pale in comparison to the thousands of tomes so close yet so far away. Shallan decides to wait for Yasna outside of the Palladium. A servant takes her to an alcove reserved for Yasna. She decides to clear her head while she waits by painting. Her equipment is more valuable to her than a chest of spheres. First, she paints Carbronth, the tension draining from her body. Her method of painting is not so dissimilar from sculptors who work first in vague shapes, then each iteration becoming more and more specific. Next, she paints a portrait of Yulb and the porter. Shallan's goal isn't merely to paint with charcoal and paper. Her medium is the soul itself. Creation Spren gather around, watching the painting. Skill makes a difference in whether or not Creation Spren gather. Eventually, she held up the page, satisfied. It depicted Yulb and the porter in detail, with hints of the busy city behind. She'd gotten their eyes right. That was the most important. Each of the 10 essences had an analogous part of the human body. Blood for liquid, hair for wood, and so forth. The eyes were associated with crystal and glass, the windows into a person's mind and spirit. Some men collect trophies or money, but Shallan collects people. These first 2 paintings were merely warm-ups. Finally, Shallan begins painting Yasna soul-casting the boulder away. She closes her eyes briefly, placing herself in the moment she had witnessed earlier, and begins, losing herself in her painting. 24 Creation Spren gather around by the time the painting is finished. Regardless of what may come, Yasna was now a part of Shallan's collection. Shallan is confident that Yasna will appreciate her determination, but notes that Yasna is a person who would admire a more rational, logical approach. Shallan begins writing a lengthy letter explaining that while the sciences may be logical, people are not. More importantly, she notes that while more qualified candidates likely came by their education with ease, she had to fight for her knowledge, that she was hungry to learn in a way that those more privileged might not be. The arguments are imperfect, she thinks, and is uncomfortable with the lies built on truths she had included, but before she can crumple the paper, she hears the sounds of footsteps. In walks an Ardent in his early 20s. As he goes to grab a chair for himself, Shallan notes her father had owned only 3 elderly Ardents. The Ardent, Brother Cabsal, returns and admires Shallan's creation. He insists that Shallan do away with her formalities, while Shallan is taken aback by the young Ardent's uncouth demeanor. The two banter for a time, exchanging witticisms about manure, respect, and the Almighty. Brother Cabsal applies lacquer to the painting, partly to Shallan's alarm, though she's too timid to interject. Fortunately, Brother Cabsal is suitably capable and applies the lacquer perfectly. The young Ardent decides to leave, but not before he requests Shallan let Yasna know that he's looking for her. He believes Yasna presents a unique challenge and wouldn't be able to live with himself if he didn't take an opportunity to convert her. Shallan feels bad about a miscommunication between her and Brother Cabsal regarding her relationship to Yasna. In an effort to mitigate that concern, Brother Cabsal asks Shallan if there's anything she's uniquely fond of, to which she responds that she likes jam. Brother Cabsal takes his leave, and a short time later, an angry-looking Yasna enters into the alcove. Chapter 8. Nearer the Flame. A furious Yasna orders Shallan to withdraw, making it perfectly clear that the two were not to see each other again. Shallan leaves the alcove in a hurry, holding back tears. She reaches the porter's shaft, but instead of calling for them, she collapses to the floor. Painspren gather around her head as she berates herself. Shallan does not like confrontation. Anger reminds her of her father's tirades. Moments later, a servant in black approaches. Shallan had been so wrapped up in her misery that she had not heard him approach. The servant informs Shallan that Yasna wishes to speak with her once more. She composes herself and re-enters the alcove. A calmer Yasna apologizes for her outburst. Persistence is a trait she usually encourages. She has a tendency towards stubbornness herself, and it can be difficult to accept in others what one clings to in themselves. Yasna further remarks,
I know what people say of me. I should hope that I'm not as harsh as some say, though a woman could have far worse than a reputation for sternness. It can serve one well.
Shallan fidgets, confused, until Yasna gestures toward the spheres Shallan had been using for light in the bowl on the desk. She had forgotten all about the money. As she collects the spheres, she informs Yasna that Brother Cabsal had been looking for her. Yasna notes Shallan had been surprised about the spheres, to which Shallan responds she had merely waited outside the alcove to steady her nerves. Shallan, feeling that Yasna's initial tirade has passed, inquires what she thought of her letter. The letter had been buried under a stack of paperwork, so Shallan awkwardly waits for Yasna to read it. The letter impresses Yasna. Shallan's instincts in writing it had been correct. Yasna concedes several of Shallan's arguments, but still finds her qualities lacking. She believes now that some leniency may be granted to Shallan. Shallan may repetition her at a future date, provided she obtains sufficient groundwork in the realms of history and philosophy. Shallan's heart sinks. While most would be thrilled for such an opportunity, for Shallan there simply isn't enough time. Heist aside, merely being associated with Yasna Kholin may have even been enough to rescue her house. Once she leaves the Palladium, Shallan reflects on her options, thinking about her father, his unknown plans, his strange maps, and her eldest brother, Helaron, who had supposedly vanished years ago. To Shallan's surprise, she hears Yalb calling out to her. It seems he had been gambling, successfully, with the city guards. Yalb takes this opportunity to take his winnings and leave. A wise choice, as Yalb reveals he had been cheating, a revelation which horrifies Shallan, as if gambling weren't bad enough. She chastises Yalb, who shrugs it off. Yalb is disappointed and confused to hear that Yasna did not accept Shallan as her ward. Amidst numerous compliments, Yalb suggests that Shallan make one more attempt. In cards, you always got to try a third hand. It wins the most often.
But that's not really true. The laws of probability and statistics.
Don't know much blusterin' math, but I do know the passions. You win when you need it most, you see? Shallan is hesitant to try yet again, fearing Yasna's wrath, until an idea comes to mind. Yalb takes Shallan to a nearby bookstore. A portly man greets Shallan in a condescending tone. Shallan requests books from a list of names Yasna had inquired about in their interview. The portly man nods to his wife to fetch the books. The portly man continues his condescension, inquiring why Shallan might not want something nicer, like a simple romance novel. Shallan's patience and tolerance are low after the stressful day she's had, so although she feels slightly bad about not restraining herself, she proceeds to dress down the shopkeep with wit, logic, and a great deal of sarcasm. The wife returns with the requested books, and the three of them begin sifting through which ones she'd like to purchase. The final price for the books she wants is tallied at 10 emerald bromes. This shocks Shallan, not only because she only has 8 emerald bromes left, but also because emerald bromes are the largest denomination of spheres. Fortunately, Yalb enters the shop, begging Shallan to return to another bookshop from which she had supposedly visited, but denied patronage. Shallan catches on to the con quickly, and she's able to haggle down to the price of 2 emerald bromes and 3 sapphires. The two leave the bookstore. Shallan gifts Yalb the portrait she drew of him, taking a mental image of him examining said portrait for later. Next, she heads back to the conclave, then the Vale, at which point she requests an alcove to study. The price to rent an alcove is 2 sky marks. Shallan winces at the price. She's running dangerously low on funds. She pays the price, renting an alcove fairly close to the one Yasna had occupied. Her plan is to study as much of the books as she possibly can before Yasna leaves Kharbranth, hoping to impress her one last time. Just as she's about to begin studying, she hears Yasna's voice.
I'm never going to be rid of you, am I?
Yasna sees right through Shallan's plan, thinking it clever and showing of determination. She claims to know why Shallan seeks her wardship, a comment that momentarily terrifies Shallan, though Yasna seems to only know the surface motivation and not the parts involving the soulcaster. Yasna sifts through Shallan's belongings, pausing momentarily on the portrait of herself, then through the more detailed notebook of drawings.
Why have you made these sketches? Why brightness? Well, because I wanted to.
At long last, Yasna accepts Shallan as her ward. She notes that while Shallan does have much of the opportunist Yasna had initially perceived in her, there are many sides to a person. By looking at Shallan's belongings, she now sees a person who also studies for its own sake, a promising quality. If she cannot get rid of Shallan, she might as well make use of her. Dismissed, Shallan goes looking for a servant to fetch her belongings from the Wind's Pleasure, then hopefully to sleep.